Matthew was a very loved child. He was an 18-year-old American boy like
normal
everybody
boy.
else in this country.
Normal
is.
boy.
When he was born, just the cutest little baby with big brown eyes.
He was a handsome little boy, and he was very happy all the time.
He was such a free spirit. He was so happy all the time, and he had a smile to die for.
I remember Matt's smile, boy, I'll tell you something.
He was a charmer.
loving.
Yeah, those eyes of his could probably get him in a lot of trouble.
He was always involved, he likes being involved in sports.
We used to play basketball, paintball, and
he was always a scrapper, though. That's one thing we liked about him. If you picked on him, he'd pick on your back.
someone to always talk to, personal relationships, someone to depend on.
He was a great person, lots of fun.
I miss him. I miss him every day of my life.
We called him Matthew, we called him Matt. The girls a lot called him Matty, but he was my Matt. And he loved to fool around with the kids and wrestle with the boys, and he and Annie were very, very close because they were the closest in age, and those two, they were like two peas in a pod. But unfortunately, apparently he was having trouble sleeping, and he was having bad dreams and waking up and starting to have like panic attacks. That's when I said to him, Matt, maybe it would be helpful if you talked to somebody outside of the family, would you want to do that? So I made an appointment with him. So we go in there, and she sits down with us, and after no more than 15 minutes of talking with Matthew and asking some questions, she gives us samples of Lexapro. So I said, what about side effects? I said, what should we expect from something like this? And she says, well, they're very well tolerated. And she said, they could have like headache or nausea or maybe some insomnia. So we went home with our sample pack of Lexapro, and at that point, he stopped wanting to talk. He seemed to be withdrawing more. This was weird behavior for him. Well, a lot was happening at this time also, and he was graduating from high school. Of course, the big plan, the kids they go to Senior Beach Week. He didn't want to go. He wanted to go visit his brother. And off he went. The day that he was supposed to be coming home, it was around 1 o'clock. I hadn't heard from him yet. He was supposed to call me when he finally left. Later on, I guess it was after I got off work, I called, and he didn't answer. But a little while later, he called me back, and he said, he said he was almost to North Carolina. It was about 11:30, and I called. He said, I'm fine, I just passed Roanoke. I woke up at around 2:30, kind of jumped up at the clock, and realized he should have been home an hour. So I called the cell phone and went straight to voicemail. I kept calling and calling. I'm like, Matthew, answer the friggin' phone. I was like so upset. Fell asleep, woke up again. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. He still wasn't home. I didn't know what to do. I started getting ready for work. Went to work. I could hardly function. I went, told my boss I have to go home. Get in the door, phone's ringing. And there's this man on the other end, and he said, I'm looking for the family of Matthew Stubing. I said, this is his mother. Who's this? And he said, I'm calling about the jumping. Our world blew apart. We couldn't imagine that this had happened. We couldn't understand because this just wasn't Matthew. None of this was Matthew. I mean, it was like, made no sense. It made no sense. That was the beginning of my story. As a mother, I needed to make sense of what had happened to my child. There were so many questions. What had we missed? The first answer came 6 months after Matthew's death, when my husband found a magazine article that linked psychiatric drugs to suicide. I was horrified. And yet, I knew we had found the answer to the biggest question of all. How could this have happened? The article answered some questions, but made me think of so many more. I had to find out for myself. I had to do something. This is for you, Matthew. Before, all I had ever heard about psychiatric drugs from the media, at schools, in the doctor's office, was how safe and effective they were. You know, you feel sad and that means you have a chemical imbalance in the brain. Just take a pill and that will help even you out. No problem. But this certainly didn't happen in Matthew's case. Something was wrong with that story, and I needed to find out what. But were there any professionals who could tell me what's really going on? Dr. David Stein, a psychologist who has written many books and articles against the use of psychiatric drugs on children, agreed to talk with me. So I made the 3-hour drive to see him.
Tell me what brought you to drive all the way down here.
Well, we went to a doctor, a psychologist,
Okay.
and my son was diagnosed with depression, and we were told that it was caused by a chemical imbalance. Is there such a thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain that can cause psychological problems?
No, actually, that's one of the misstatements of disinformation or misinformation that's coming out. And unfortunately, I think your psychologist believes there's a chemical imbalance, and a lot of people do. The psychologists, educators, the psychiatrists certainly accept it, and now pediatricians are accepting it. It is not caused by chemical imbalance. And what makes me angry is so many of the doctors are just buying into that. It's just not true.
And there's no test or anything that could have been done to determine that. Am I right?
They claim that they found this chemical imbalance or that anatomical problem or anomaly with the brain or nervous system, and yet if you were to send your child to a lab to have the chemical tests done on his blood or urine, they would look at you like you're insane because it can't be done. So what they claim is an imbalance cannot be measured by any laboratory or urine tests or PET scans or CAT scans. None of it can be replicated at the clinical level. And there are about 1,000 claims that come out every year where they think they found the cause of depression or ADD or bipolar disorder. None of it is true. Does that answer your question, Celeste?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so. I feel that if I had known better, if I'd had the information in front of me to make a decision, he would never have been on that drug, to be honest. He never would have been on that drug. And I believe we would have worked it through. So I feel to blame.
You feel guilty.
I do. I think I'll always feel that way.
You did not let your son down. You were an honest parent, honestly seeking help for your son who was having some trouble. And if you went to the bookstore, the books would say the same thing. The same garbage would be inundated through all the bookshelves. So you'd pull one book after another book after another book, and all you would get is chemical imbalance or a neurological disorder and all this. And they need the drugs, and the drugs and therapy, the combination is the way to go. You would have gotten it from everywhere you would have looked, except the very few scholars around the nation and the world that are fighting this. And we're a rare breed. We read deep into literature. You're not at fault, Celeste. I think your attitude will change. But right now, the prevailing and pervasive attitude is what you walked into. It makes me angry. I feel anger at hearing your story.
Dr. Stein, thank you so much.
God bless you, and I'll help you any way I can.
Appreciate it.
What Dr. Stein said shocked me. Why hadn't I heard this before? Why hadn't anyone told me this? Was the mental health industry knowingly lying to me? And if they had lied to me, surely I wasn't the only one they lied to. I found out I was not alone. There were a lot of other mothers who had been through similar experiences and were speaking out. Meeting these women was an opportunity to hear about what had happened to their children and come to terms with what had happened to Matthew. Thank you all very much for being here today. I think this is really important things we have to talk about. And I've met so many wonderful people through this ordeal for all the wrong reasons. And one heartbreak after another. So I know there are so many stories just right here in this room. And I want people to know what this can do to families and to children. So thank you for being here today and helping me.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, they let you think that one doesn't matter. You know, they expect that a certain percentage are going to suffer these side effects, and that's okay with them.
One child's dying is
But it's not okay it's not okay.
No.
And there's one, and there's one, and there's one,
That's
and then
right.
there's 100, and then there's 1,000, and then
That's
there's
right.
10,000,
That's
and
right.
it's not just one.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
one is too many.
That's right.
But it just goes on and on.
When I took Matthew to the doctor, he was diagnosed with a clinical depression, and they said it was because of a chemical imbalance. What happened to you when you took Candace?
We took Candace because she was exhibiting anxiety at school. She had started blocking on tests, and I had a couple of teachers say, you know, Candace needs to study for these tests, when I would know that she had, because I used to study with her and she'd always make note cards and everything. But she would get to the test and she would freeze, or else her writing was so horrific that she might have had the right answer, but the teacher couldn't read it, so she'd get it wrong anyway. And I took Candace to a highly recommended child psychiatrist, and he talked to her for about 15 minutes and said, well, she has a generalized anxiety disorder. The only way that this anxiety was manifesting itself was in tests. There were no other areas of anxiety.
They're not telling you that it's entirely psychologically based and subjective. They're just saying, oh, well, based on these symptoms, you have a chemical imbalance.
And then with a chemical imbalance, it's like, where did they come up with that? What chemicals?
Exactly.
I love that. Like, where's the test? Don't we get a test?
Where are the tests, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
you can draw somebody's blood and see if they have cancer. You can, those are real medical diagnoses. If somebody tells you that your child has ADHD, ask them to draw their blood and show you the chemical imbalance causing this. And they can't do it because they haven't proven the chemical imbalance that's causing this. It's completely arbitrary and subjective, and it is their opinion that that's what's going on with your child, who you are actually the expert on.
They always hide behind, I say they, you know, the psychiatrists and the psychologists, they always hide behind, we're doing this in the best interests of your child, you know? And that's really hard to get around, you know, as a mom. You know, you're out there and you're like, I want to do what's in the best interest of my kid, you know?
Playing on the guilt again.
Yeah.
If you loved your child, you drug them for their own well-being.
And you want to do what is right for your child, so you bow to the pressure because you think that they know, because they have an educational history, they've gone to college, they're more powerful, they know.
They're the professionals.
You know your child better than anybody. Tune them out. You do what your heart tells you. You don't listen to them.
These women were strong, knowledgeable, and determined to spread the word that what had happened to their children could happen to anyone's. Because when it comes to diagnosing kids with psychiatric disorders, no one really knows what they're doing, as a group of high school students found out when they interviewed psychiatrists at a recent psychiatric convention.
With all the diagnoses out there, how do you know which one to choose?
For a patient?
Yeah.
The diagnosis?
This is a good question.
Well, it can be pretty difficult to pick a diagnosis.
Psychiatry is not like other fields of medicine, and the diagnoses are sometimes kind of muddy.
Yeah, just often pick and mix, so it's not that difficult usually.
I pick the psychosis group of diagnosis.
We don't always make the perfect diagnosis, but we try to make one and revise it.
It's really hard. They're oftentimes wrong half the time.
Sometimes we don't need a diagnosis.
Oftentimes it's not for us as important what the exact diagnosis is.
Diagnosis is based on what is it for. If it's for reimbursement, or if it's to get you off the hook.
You develop a list of possibilities as to what the diagnosis might be.
Well, asking all the questions in your mind. You can't ask all the questions of everybody. You can't ask everybody all the questions. So you have to do the questions in your mind and ask the right questions. And then you pin down. I don't know if that's the right answer.
Whatever your answer is, totally fine.
Matthew's doctor never informed me about the unscientific nature of her diagnosis or the serious possible consequences of taking the psychiatric drugs to treat it. So I went to see the well-known physician and author, Dr. Doris Rapp, to find out what I should have been told. My son was put on the drug Lexapro, and we were told that the side effects were very benign, headache, dry mouth, nausea. What serious side effects should I have been warned of?
Well, drugs such as that can cause depression, it can cause dizziness, and there are many isolated reports of almost any area of the body being affected by those. These are the ones that cause the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the heart disease, the metabolic defects. And I think that obviously lung function and cardiac function need to be monitored on children if they are finding enlarged hearts and the children are having heart attacks and strokes and increased blood pressure and irregular heartbeats. And it was found that many times when you stop these drugs, the symptoms don't disappear. You think the shaking is going to go away. It may not go away. And there's nothing more devastating to a young child than to twitch and have these jerks in their body that they can't control. You should have been told to watch for any change in how your son feels or acts or behaves. Any change in his appetite. Is he dizzy? Does he have problems with his coordination?
Right.
Did they tell you to contact them if there was any change?
No.
They didn't give you a sheet with side effects?
No.
That you should have received a sheet that said these are the things you might look for. And if you notice any of these, but I think most people would be scared silly because it might be a whole page of side effects and you might not even know the terms, but you get out a dictionary.
Or it's in print that's so small
that's right.
You can't even
You get a magnifying glass. And I say that you shouldn't have to be the doctor, but in today's day and age with so much going on that shouldn't be happening, I'd say parents, go check on what your children are taking. Don't assume that it's normal to have a reaction if you're seeing one. Call your doctor up and complain. Get a second opinion. But you've got to cover yourself in every way that you can possibly cover yourself. I think you can't drug healthy bodies and make them unhealthy in so many ways and expect those individuals to grow up to be a functional, creative persons in the society. They simply won't be able to reach their full potential because the drugs change them. I think that what is going on is a sin. God must be standing up there saying, "What are you doing down there?" What are you doing?
I agree. Thank you so much.
You're going to make me cry.
Thank you very much.
You have some tea inside here and coffee.
These are dangerous drugs that don't cure anything. And the diagnosis of ADHD is it's just epidemic right now. You know, it's so easy to do to label a child that way, and then that label follows your child all the way through life.
Well, Shayna was diagnosed as early as first grade. So the school psychologist sent us a letter and stated that Shayna had all the characteristics of ADHD and needed to go to a doctor. So I took the letter from the school psychologist to the psychiatrist with me. 45 minutes later, walked out with a definite diagnosis of ADHD and a prescription in hand. They judged her whole entire life on that subjective checklist and put her on drugs right away. Progressively, she would revert back to where she'd fidget in her seat, and the school would call and say, Shayna's not paying attention again, she's out of her seat, you know.
Up the dose.
Up the dose, up the dose. February 26, 2001, I received a phone call from the school nurse at exactly 10 o'clock and said Shayna had taken a fall in library. And immediately I went to school to get her, took her to the doctor. I was only a few feet away from her, signed her name on a clipboard. I turned back, and she's having a grand mal seizure. I picked her up in my arms, and I screamed for the doctor, and the doctor said, Vicki, lay her on the floor. I immediately laid her on the floor, but I kept her head right here, and I kept massaging her head and said, Mommy's right here, Sissy, I'm not going to leave you. And I looked into her deep brown eyes, and the last vision I seen was my daughter dying, and there was nothing that I could do to help her. And I didn't know at the time. Does she know? I didn't know. Did she know that I couldn't help her? What was going through her mind while I'm watching her die? And I have no idea. The answers will never be there. But I keep looking back and thinking, I did what was best, what I thought was best at the time. Even though it turned out to be deadly, and I buried my child, I'm not the blame. A week before Shayna died, I took her with agitation, low urinary output, and weight gain, which were 3 red signs. And I took him to the psychiatrist and I said, this is what's happening. And he told me that I was an overprotective, paranoid mother, and what I was seeing were not side effects. And I look back now, and that whole week, she was dying, and we didn't know. And they told us that even if they would have done something different, we still couldn't have saved her. She had too much in her system, and she was dying little by little. So when I say, even if you would have noticed anything, they wouldn't have paid attention. They chose just to ignore me. The psychiatrists, the pharmaceutical industry, they're the people that I need to blame and hold accountable for what happened. And, you know, I look at it now and I just wish I could turn back the hands of time and never put her on the medication, never believed in the professionals, did everything in my life differently, but I can't do that. All I can do is go forth now and talk to people, express the concern, reach my hand out and touch every life and hope it makes a difference.
I had no idea that psychiatric drugs could create so many horrible side effects in so many people. An estimated 42,000 deaths every year, whether by homicide, suicide, or overdose, are linked to psychiatric drugs. There was one thing I just didn't understand, though. How could a drug, especially one that was supposed to help, cause a person to take the extreme step of deciding to kill himself or others? Matthew would never have taken his own life. It must have been the drug. But how? I asked this of Pamela Seefeld, a pharmacist and an expert on the adverse effects of psychiatric drugs on the human body.
It's very nice to meet you. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me. My son was only on the one, but he started off at one dose and did not do well. And it was after that that his demeanor really started to change. He became very anxious, very withdrawn, more withdrawn than he had been, because at least before that he was still talking to us. And within 9 weeks of starting the medication, Matthew was gone.
The symptoms that you're describing, the description of these symptoms, it's very classic of drug-induced psychosis, because he couldn't metabolize it. You have to understand, it wasn't his depression that got him. It was the medicine at a toxic level in his brain that made him psychotic. And that's what it comes down to. I'm telling you, the drug metabolism issues are killing a lot of people. If they're only offering you medicines, and the medicines have this possibility of causing psychosis, that's what's really happening. The person's drug level gets toxic in the brain. These medicines like Lexapro, Paxil, Zoloft, they have to work in the brain. That's what they do. They pass through the brain, and that they work on those receptors in the brain. If you think about it, if you have a normal dose of a drug and people don't do really well with it, if the increase in the concentration is 5 times, think about what that does to the person. 5 times the normal amount of drug in the brain. People always become psychotic on it, and they call it drug-induced psychosis.
Well, I feel very strongly that's what happened to my son.
I'm sure of it. When your son was given those medicines, you know, he can't metabolize those. He had a toxic level in the bloodstream and in his brain, and as a result of that, he took his life. And what has happened is that they're not looking at the real facts. The drugs are very dangerous.
And they know.
Yeah. Oh yes.
They know that this is happening.
And nothing's being done. Let me tell you that. No. Nothing's being done. And so, if I can bring you a science reason, it's not obscure like drugs are bad, medicines are bad. It's not that. I'm telling you, there's science behind what we're discussing here, and I'm just really glad I could be the pharmacist to tell you what's really happening. I want to share this with a lot of people.
And I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you.
It doesn't take much looking to find some pretty horrible examples of children who became extremely violent after being put on psychiatric drugs. Kip Kinkle, for example, shot his parents, then went to his high school and killed 2 and wounded 23 more while withdrawing from Prozac. Christopher Pittman was taking Zoloft when he shot both his grandparents and burned down their house. And Eric Harris, who killed 13 people at Columbine, then committed suicide, was on Luvox. 9 of the last 13 school shooters were either on or withdrawing from psychiatric drugs. And the medical records of the others are sealed, so we may never find out the truth. But instead of warning us, psychiatrists and drug companies are playing down the most serious side effects and ignoring the rest.
Matthew loved his family, loved us so much that when he jumped from the bridge, he was wearing a life vest. The reason, and he wrote it on a note that he left in his truck, and said that he was wearing a life vest so that he could be found, so that his parents wouldn't have to worry about where he was. Now, is this a child who wants to hurt his family? He wouldn't have hurt us for the world. Sorry, Annie. But this is what happened. This is what this drug did to my son. It made him someone he wasn't. Matthew, she knows also, because she had a sweet little girl who was only 12 years old. You know.
You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, and I still think back to being in that doctor's office and saying, I don't want her on this, and his casualness, his, what are you worried about? And not knowing any different. We've all talked about the fact we just didn't know. But the guilt that comes from watching people give your child medication or giving it to them yourself, making sure they take it because they tell you, don't let them miss a day.
That's right.
And it ends up killing them. I think about the warning signs that we had that we didn't know were warning signs. I remember sitting there watching Candace go like this, and I said, Candace, what's wrong? And she said, I don't know, I'm just itchy, and not realizing it, that it was that feeling of needles, of burning under her skin, and she was trying to get rid of it, but she was 12 years old and she couldn't tell me. And I'm thinking, it's
shaking.
Yeah.
Showing me how his hands were shaking.
And I say
telling me that his heart was beating fast.
Candace was shaking, and I remember thinking I really should take her to a neurologist because, you know, her hand is shaking. Sometimes it would be hard to hold something. But not knowing that that was a sign that the severity of the amount of medication in her system, I just assumed it was dry skin. And I think about her curled up in her father's arms laughing. And that's my last time I saw my child alive. Who would ever assume that this happy child that is embraced in her father's love with her sister right there would walk up to her room and hang herself from the valance of her bed? And nobody knew it. They were there. Nobody knew it because we had no signs. I think about days when I thought I was going to die myself because my pain was so intense that nobody could live through the breaking heart that I was suffering. I remember being in a fetal position on my laundry room floor, thinking I was dying, and calling my therapist saying, I don't think I can live. I can't catch my breath. I can't live. And what did keep me living was the fact that I had a surviving child who needed me. And I needed to be there for her because I don't know if I could have done it. And I remember Candace had drawn a little heart on her hand. And in the heart, she had written 911. And then she had covered it with a bumblebee sticker. She didn't know she was going to die. She thought she was going to be saved. She didn't know she was doing this. 12 years old.
Oh my.
Okay. There's Matt. Matthew was sick, but it was basketball practice.
Matthew had 22 points the other night. He was awesome.
Matthew's personality was infectious. His love of life was infectious. Everybody wanted a part of it.
He was just a breath of fresh air, like sunshine, and people loved being around him.
He was outgoing and always smiling and funny and, you know, playful.
Matthew was a friend to everybody. You know, he'd play with anybody, young or old or this or that.
My first memory of Matt was in the 3rd grade. We had the same teacher.
We really became friends in 3rd grade when we had a class together.
The first time I had ever met him actually was at a high school football game.
And we hit it off instantly. I remember one of the first things I remember about Matt and the Steubings. I remember coming home and telling my dad that they're all a bunch of angels.
He was so much fun. He taught me how to skip school.
He was always supportive, like, if there was anything wrong, he knew how to pick you up.
We were on a basketball team together.
We played basketball together all the time growing up.
We spent hours next to each other, ribbing each other, and by the end I was just proud as I could be to finally, you know, at least in one of the games I beat him.
I mean, it was very easy to stand on the side and just, you know, just grin ear to ear because the kid was absolutely cool. And in my life, he is still cool.
The more I learned just how much our kids are being drugged, the more outraged I became. But I was truly horrified at the extent of psychiatric drugging that is forced on children who don't even have a parent to protect them. No one knows this better than foster child counselor Sonia Mohammed, who works with the County of Los Angeles, dealing every day with children diagnosed and forced to take psychiatric drugs.
My personal experience has been that these drugs are very, very dangerous. We don't see any evidence of them doing or accomplishing the things that the parents are being told that they're supposed to accomplish. And unfortunately, there are many stories like yours, which is so unfortunate. My heart is with you and your family that you had to experience this, because no one is really listening to any type of alternative conversation regarding this.
It seems that foster children are much more likely to be medicated than, say, other children. Why is that?
Several reasons. The main reason being is we don't have time to deal with you. That's my take on it. So what we'll do is shut you up and we'll shut you down. That's basically it. Most of the kids that are placed by the Department of Children and Family Services, they're there because they were removed from their homes because of abuse, whether it be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, a combination thereof. It doesn't seem to occur to the system that this kid is scared. This kid, if they are a victim already of abuse or of some form, that they already are traumatized. And so many of the kids are immediately, in some cases, referred to the local psychologist and diagnosed with something. And then as a consequence, then the drugs are recommended. What I have mentioned to some people before is that I have been in homes where I saw the kids' files piled up in a worker's arms, the files taken to the local psychiatrist. The psychiatrist write a diagnosis, write prescriptions, and they've never even seen the child.
Based on what they've read in a file?
Based on absolutely nothing, because there was nothing but the manager's or whomever case worker's word that this kid is acting out. So we don't even really sometimes have anything in writing other than they're not cooperating with the program, they're crying too much at night, they refuse to go to school in the morning, and that sort of thing. Just verbal information, not even any notes that the psychiatrist can actually follow.
What type of diagnosis are they giving? Are they calling them ADHD?
Well, always ADHD. Everybody is ADHD. That's the beginning one. And then bipolar, and then manic depressive. For foster kids, it's disastrous because many of them, they're bouncing from home to home, school to school, and they're not learning. And so, of course, they're learning disordered, and all of them are emotionally disturbed, and all of them are ADHD. And I would probably say in Los Angeles County alone, we have probably about 50,000 kids in the system. And I would be willing to
say— In the foster care system?
Yes, in Los Angeles County alone. We're not talking Orange County, any of the counties up north.
What percentage of those do you think are on drugs?
I would be willing to say from experience well over, somewhere between 50% and 75%.
It's astounding. Thank you so much for everything. Our children came from loving homes, and we've still experienced these problems, but as far as foster care children go, you know, they've all had issues and reasons that they've been taken from their homes, and I understand that they are automatically put on drugs. Certainly they have to go through psychiatric evaluations, so you know, you have experience with that.
Right, yeah. Actually, I remember seeing a study that children in foster care are 3 times more likely to be on a psychiatric medication than other children who were on Medicaid. The foster parents don't know. They don't know. When you go into the foster classes, they're told that medication is the answer. When your child is having these issues, get them in. Get them in. Those are the exact words. Get them in fast so that you can get their medication adjusted. And then the issues continue, or the child just kind of goes numb.
Or the children die, like
or the children die.
In Florida.
When I got my little boy, he was on 8 50-milligram pills a day of Seroquel, the antipsychotic, which for a child under 50 pounds is really incredible. That was on top of his ADHD medication. He was so drugged and so violent, I was actually afraid of him, and we would hide our knives at night, our kitchen knives. When we'd go to bed as a family, because we were afraid that he would get up in the night and harm someone. he became so bad that he actually, in one of his foster homes, slaughtered their family pets with a kitchen knife. The foster mother came home and she sees this and she thought a burglar had gotten into the house. She was just distraught. Oh my gosh, who could have done this? It never even crossed her mind that the preschooler did it. And she figured it out, that it was him. He had gotten so violent on these medications that he had killed her little family pets. It was decided that he should go to the state hospital, and I left there and I decided that I would try him. They said I had 2 weeks to turn him around. And then the state hospital was still there if I couldn't do anything. And so I brought him into my home, and the first thing we did is tons of nutrition, food in its most natural form, tons of raw food, tons of whole grains. That's what we did. Lots of real nutrition. And then we started taking him off of his medications. And he turned around so much that I became known in the caseworker's office as the miracle worker. He just made such a turnaround, and today he's just incredible. He skipped a grade, and he's still tops out, nationally. He tests out so high in even the grade that he's in. Plays a couple instruments. He's fabulous at school. This is an exceptional child.
He's not showing violence toward his sister or your family pets?
Oh, no. He's very sweet with all of our pets. We have 5 dogs, 3 cats, and he's wonderful. And it's just incredible to me how many children out there are in his exact shoes and will never...
There aren't enough people like you to care.
And the doctor can just blame it on trauma.
Or, if a child commits suicide so often, it's just, we didn't get to them soon enough. That's what it is. We didn't get to them soon enough. Because that takes the blame off of them completely. Or like my son's psychiatrist said when her patient shot himself, where'd he get a gun? No, looking introspectively, where'd he get the will? So it's just somebody else's fault. It's never the medications that I prescribed. Or like it was an everyday occurrence, and I was just sitting there flabbergasted and thinking to myself when she said, when she was finally, it said that he was okay to come off all his medications, and with his Seroquel, she said, wow, I am just so glad to see that he can still imagine and play, because so many children who are on this medication for any length of time lose that ability to play anymore. And I was just shocked and thought, how do you sleep at night? I can't imagine taking somebody's creative ability from them. What could possibly be worse than making somebody into someone who they're permanently
like a
scarred?
zombie?
Yes, they're a permanent zombie. What could be worse than that? Tell me a disease that you would rather have than that.
The situation with foster care is truly horrible. As I soon found out, not only are thousands of children drugged every year, but sometimes the results are fatal. I flew to Florida to meet with Michael Friedland, an attorney who represents foster kids damaged by psychiatric drugs, including 16-year-old Emilio Villamar.
Good morning, Celeste. Very nice to meet you. I'm glad you're able to make it.
Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
My pleasure.
How common is the use of psychiatric drugs in the foster care system?
The drugging of children in foster care, I understand, is a way too common occurrence because it's a simple fix. Foster mom or foster dad or social worker says we have a child who won't sleep through the night, or a child who's waking up with night terrors, or a child who's misbehaving or redirecting their frustration on other childs, or using their hands to hurt, not help. And instead of sitting down and working with that child and taking the time to say, what's causing them to act out? No, we're not going to worry about that. We have a fix. Give them this pill. They're using these poor children who are coming from incredibly difficult environments as guinea pigs.
With no one to protect them.
With absolutely no one to protect them. And that's why they prey on them. Because there's not a mom or dad there that can say, hey, no, I'm not going to let you test this untested, unproven drug on my child. So let's test it on children that don't have someone to be their voice.
Oh my goodness. You represent the mother of Emilio Villamar. Can you tell us something about his story?
Just like your son, Emilio was a vibrant 16-year-old boy, played water polo, excelled at school, had lots of friends, came from a